Neuroplasticity is the cornerstone of how we change, adapt, and grow throughout our lives. It is the brain's ability to rewire itself based on experience, thought, emotion, and most importantly, repeated behavior. When we talk about consistency, what we are really talking about is directing the power of neuroplasticity with intention. The brain doesn't change based on what we do once. It changes based on what we do repeatedly. And not only what we do, but how often, how regularly, and under what emotional and physiological conditions. From a neuroscience perspective, repetition is not just useful for change. It is required. Every time you perform a behavior, a specific set of neural circuits is activated. These circuits communicate through electrical impulses and chemical messengers. The more frequently a particular neural pathway is used, the stronger and more efficient it becomes. The axons involved get myelinated, coated in a fatty substance that speeds up signal transmission. Over time, this results in more automatic behavior, less friction, and ultimately a habit. This is the biological basis for the saying neurons that fire together, wire together. But what does this mean in the context of consistency? It means that if you want to change anything, your mindset, your habits, your productivity, you need to repeat the new behavior so often that the brain treats it as the new normal. Think of consistency as the signal to the brain that says, this matters. Sporadic effort doesn't send that signal strongly enough. Occasional engagement with a new habit tells your brain that it's optional, but consistent action, daily, even when inconvenient, communicates urgency and importance. The brain prioritizes those signals and begins to adapt accordingly. Consistency builds what is known as long-term potentiation, a process where synapses become more effective at transmitting signals. This underlies learning and memory. When you force yourself to show up for a task, be it physical training, focused work, or even mindfulness, you are not just checking off a box. You are literally strengthening the brain's ability to perform that task more easily in the future. The early stages may feel difficult and unnatural, but that's because the brain hasn't yet optimized for it. Repetition is how you teach it to do so. It's important to realize that neuroplasticity is not always positive. The brain is agnostic. It doesn't distinguish between good or bad habits, only repeated ones. So if you're consistently procrastinating, consistently avoiding hard conversations, or consistently skipping workouts, those behaviors also get wired into your system. That's why forcing yourself to be consistent with the behaviors you want to embody is crucial. You're choosing what version of yourself your brain will adapt to support. Another key element of this process is attention. Neuroplastic changes are strengthened when a person is fully focused on the task. This means that multitasking or going through the motions without being mentally engaged results in weaker neural encoding. That's why intentional, focused repetition, especially in early stages of learning or habit formation, is so important. It's not just about doing the thing, but doing it with presence. Sleep also plays a role. During deep sleep, particularly slow-wave sleep, the brain consolidates the neural changes initiated during the day. If you are being consistent with a new behavior, but not getting adequate sleep, the consolidation process is disrupted. In other words, the brain may not store what you practiced, making it harder to build long-term change. So consistent behavior and consistent rest work together to strengthen the circuits you're trying to build. What often stops people from being consistent is the mistaken belief that they need to feel good doing it. But neuroscience shows us that action precedes motivation, not the other way around. The more you do something, even when you don't feel like it, the more fluency your brain gains in that behavior. Over time, that fluency feels like confidence, discipline, or even identity. But it starts with action. You must force the repetition before it feels natural. The brain will catch up. The process of neuroplasticity is slow, but it's reliable. You won't notice dramatic changes overnight, but that doesn't mean the changes aren't happening. Small, consistent efforts repeated daily are much more impactful to your neural circuitry than bursts of intense effort followed by long gaps. This is why forcing yourself to be consistent isn't just motivational advice, it's biological truth. Your brain is always changing. The only question is, are you directing that change, or is it happening passively? By forcing yourself to be consistent, you are actively shaping the structure and function of your brain. And over time, what once required effort becomes second nature. not because your willpower got stronger, but because your brain rewired itself to make the new behavior effortless. That is the true power of neuroplasticity through repetition. Discipline is often misunderstood. Many believe it is an inherent trait, something you either have or don't. But from a neuroscience perspective, discipline is a trainable skill, and it becomes the most critical tool when motivation fails. Motivation is a neurochemical state largely driven by dopamine that comes and goes depending on context, emotional state, sleep, nutrition, and numerous other factors. It is unreliable. Discipline, on the other hand, is the cognitive override system. It's what allows you to act in alignment with long-term goals, even when short-term feelings are screaming at you to do something else. This override system is located in the prefrontal cortex, particularly in areas responsible for planning, impulse control, and executive function. When you force yourself to act without waiting to feel like it, you engage this system deliberately. Over time, with repetition, this system becomes stronger. Just like lifting weights builds muscle, forcing yourself to act consistently without motivation builds stronger connections in the prefrontal cortex. Eventually, the brain learns that discomfort, boredom, or emotional resistance are not barriers. They are simply signals that can be observed without obeying them. This is a critical distinction. Waiting to feel motivated is like waiting for perfect weather before planting seeds. You might wait forever. But when you choose to act, even in the absence of motivation, you teach your nervous system that the behavior matters more than the feeling. That recalibrates your internal systems. Over time, you begin to value the process of action itself, not just the emotional highs that sometimes come with it. This is how true discipline is built, not by suppressing emotion, but by choosing action in the presence of it. What most people don't realize is that discipline is not about forcing the same intensity every day. It's about consistency. Some days will be better than others in terms of energy, focus, or results. But the key is showing up anyway. This consistent pattern of action creates what neuroscientists call behavioral automatization. This is when a behavior becomes so ingrained in your neural architecture that it requires less conscious effort to perform. It becomes your new baseline. But this only happens through repetition, not intensity, not motivation, and certainly not through waiting for the right moment. There's also a deeper physiological reason to prioritize discipline over motivation. The motivation tends to peak when novelty is high. But as novelty fades, and it always does, the dopamine response also drops. This is a well-documented phenomenon in neuroscience. The initial burst of energy or enthusiasm you feel when starting something new is not sustainable. If you rely on that burst to carry you, you will burn out quickly. Discipline, however, is immune to novelty. It is based on internal decision-making mechanisms that don't depend on how exciting or pleasurable something feels. This makes it sustainable over the long term. When you practice discipline regularly, you also build what's known as top-down control. This is when higher brain regions govern lower, more reactive systems. Instead of letting limbic structures like the amygdala or nucleus accumbens dictate your actions through cravings, anxiety, or apathy, you allow the prefrontal cortex to decide. This is the same part of the brain that allows delayed gratification, strategic thinking, and complex planning. By practicing discipline, you strengthen the neural circuits responsible for long-term success, regardless of the ups and downs of your emotional state. This doesn't mean emotions are bad or irrelevant. It means they are just one part of the system, not the driver. Most people treat feelings as instructions. I don't feel like working out, so I won't. But when you stop letting emotions dictate your behavior, you stop being reactive. You become proactive. This is how elite performers, athletes, and thinkers operate. They don't wait to feel good to act. They act and trust that the emotional alignment will follow. Over time, this practice begins to change your self-concept. Instead of seeing yourself as someone who's only productive when inspired, you start seeing yourself as someone who does what needs to be done, regardless of how you feel. That identity shift is reinforced through neuroplasticity. Every time you choose discipline over motivation, you send a signal to your brain, this is who I am, and your brain listens. It begins to automate that identity into the structure of your nervous system. Another interesting component is the feedback loop created by disciplined behavior. When you act without motivation and follow through, you create a small win. That win generates a dopamine response, not because of the novelty, but because of the achievement. You start to associate effort with reward, not just the external outcome, but the internal signal that says, I did it anyway. This rewires the dopamine system to support sustained effort rather than temporary excitement. Ultimately, if you want to build anything meaningful, whether it's a skill, a body, a business, or a mindset, discipline must override motivation. You cannot afford to depend on fleeting emotional states. The nervous system is designed to adapt to whatever is repeated. So if you want to become someone who acts consistently and effectively, start practicing discipline today. Not because you feel like it, but because your brain and your future depend on it. Dopamine is often misunderstood as simply the pleasure chemical, but in reality, its primary function is not to make you feel good. It is to drive action. It is the molecule of motivation, pursuit, and anticipation. When your brain anticipates a reward, dopamine levels rise, not at the point of achievement, but as you begin moving toward the goal. This means that if you only allow yourself to feel satisfaction when you reach the finish line, you're using your dopamine system in a very narrow and fragile way. But if you learn to reward the effort itself, you can train your brain to be motivated by the process, not just the result. This is the core of sustainable consistency. When you begin to value the work, not just the outcome, you change the architecture of your reward system. This is not just philosophical, it's neurological. Dopamine neurons, especially those in the ventral tegmental area, VTA, and the substantia nigra, project to areas like the nucleus accumbens and prefrontal cortex. These regions are involved in motivation, planning, and behavior. When dopamine is released in these pathways during effortful activity, the brain associates that activity with reward. Over time, you start craving the work because it becomes the very thing that activates the reward system. This is the difference between people who burn out and people who persist. Those who are outcome dependent for dopamine constantly ride an emotional roller coaster. They feel great when they win or progress, but feel depleted when the rewards are far off. On the other hand, those who train themselves to derive satisfaction from showing up, from putting in effort regardless of outcome, create a much more stable source of internal reward. This makes them more consistent and resilient in the long term. To shift your relationship with dopamine, you must learn to give yourself small cognitive rewards for the right things. Every time you complete a hard task, take a moment, not to check social media or distract yourself, but to mentally acknowledge the effort. Tell yourself, that was hard, and I did it anyway. This might sound trivial, but it has real effects on how your brain processes effort and reward. Over time, this type of internal reward system teaches your brain to link the feeling of satisfaction with the behavior of showing up, not just the result of winning. Another critical insight is that dopamine release is relative. It doesn't just spike based on achievement, it spikes based on unexpected progress. This means that small, frequent wins during the process can be more rewarding than one big win at the end. When you break down your goals into smaller, manageable milestones and celebrate each one, you create a steady release of dopamine that propels you forward. This trains your brain to seek progress, not perfection. However, it's also important to note that the dopamine system can be depleted if overused improperly. Relying on too many external rewards, such as likes, praise, or even caffeine, can dull the system over time. This is known as dopaminergic burnout. The way to protect your dopamine system is to keep it balanced by focusing on intrinsic motivation, derived from the activity itself, and by giving yourself rest periods where you don't constantly chase stimulation. This balance allows the brain to reset and remain sensitive to effort-related rewards. When you learn to enjoy effort and reframe discomfort as progress, you become neurologically equipped for consistency. This is not about denying that results matter. They do, but it's about not making them the only thing that drives your behavior. If your brain only lights up when you succeed, you will find it difficult to maintain the daily actions that lead to long-term success. But if your brain lights up every time you engage with your process, you create a neurological foundation for persistence. This understanding has powerful implications for everything from learning to fitness to personal development. For example, students who reward themselves only when they get high grades may lose interest in studying if their performance dips. But students who feel a sense of reward every time they complete a study session, even without external validation, stay more consistent and ultimately perform better over time. Similarly, someone training in the gym who only feels good when hitting personal records may struggle when progress plateaus. But the person who feels a win simply by showing up, by pushing through fatigue, or by refining form, stays engaged even through slow periods. This shift in mindset is not just motivational, it's neurochemical. You are rewiring the pathways of your brain to seek and reward the right kinds of behavior. You're building a relationship with effort that is sustainable, flexible, and deeply empowering. Over time, you stop waiting for a finish line and start enjoying the road itself. That's when consistency becomes effortless. That's when progress becomes inevitable. So, if you want to build consistency, train your brain to love the effort. Reward the process, not just the prize. Make the pursuit of your goals the source of dopamine, and you'll never run out of fuel. Your biological rhythms play a critical role in your ability to maintain consistent behavior, especially when it comes to focus, energy, and willpower. One of the most powerful, yet often overlooked, systems that governs your daily behavior is the circadian rhythm. This is your internal 24-hour biological clock that regulates numerous functions in your body and brain, including sleep, wake cycles, hormone release, core body temperature, and even cognitive performance. Understanding how this rhythm works and aligning your habits with it can drastically improve your ability to stay consistent over time. Your circadian rhythm is primarily regulated by light, particularly sunlight. The retina in your eyes contains specialized cells that detect light and send signals to a brain structure called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, SCN, which is often referred to as the master clock. This clock coordinates with peripheral clocks throughout your body, in your liver, muscles, gut, and more, to keep everything synchronized. When this system is working optimally, your energy levels, alertness, and ability to focus rise and fall in predictable patterns throughout the day. By aligning your consistent behaviors with these natural highs and lows, you can build habits that are biologically supported rather than resisted. For example, shortly after waking, your body experiences a natural rise in cortisol levels, which increases alertness and readiness to engage with your environment. This makes the early part of the day a powerful window for cognitively demanding tasks such as learning, writing, or planning. This window generally lasts until the early afternoon, when alertness begins to dip due to natural shifts in body temperature and energy. By understanding this cycle, you can strategically place your most important consistent habits, those that require the most mental effort, during these windows of peak capacity. Instead of fighting your biology, you're working with it. Anchoring your habits to fixed times each day also strengthens your consistency. The brain thrives on predictability. When you perform the same behavior at the same time each day, you begin to associate that time and context with that behavior. This creates what is known as a time-based cue, or a temporal anchor. Over time, the behavior becomes automatic, not because of willpower, but because your nervous system has come to expect it. This is one reason why people who work out, study, or meditate at the same time every day tend to maintain those behaviors more easily than those who do them at random times. The habit becomes part of the circadian architecture. Moreover, circadian alignment doesn't only improve behavior, it also affects motivation and mood. When your sleep, eating, and activity patterns are out of sync with your biological clock, something often seen in shift workers or people with irregular routines, you experience what's known as circadian disruption. This leads to decreased dopamine sensitivity, impaired cognitive function, and increased stress hormone levels. In simpler terms, your motivation drops, your focus weakens, and your resilience decreases. Trying to be consistent in this state is like trying to build a house during a storm. It's not impossible, but it's significantly harder. The power of leveraging circadian timing is that it reduces the internal friction to act. It's no longer about summoning willpower every time. It's about creating a biological rhythm where the behavior fits naturally into your day. This is especially important during the early stages of habit formation, when behaviors are still unfamiliar and require more conscious effort. If you attach those behaviors to a consistent circadian time point, say, exercising at 7 a.m. or reading at 9 p.m., you reduce the cognitive load associated with deciding when or whether to act. The time itself becomes the signal to begin, Another important factor is light exposure. The quality and timing of light you experience each day can either strengthen or disrupt your circadian rhythm. Getting bright light in your eyes within the first 30 to 60 minutes of waking helps anchor your circadian clock, boost your cortisol levels appropriately, and enhance wakefulness throughout the day. Avoiding bright artificial light in the evening, especially blue light, helps your body begin its natural transition toward rest. These light cues not only affect sleep, but they also influence how stable your energy and mood are during waking hours, which directly affects your ability to stay consistent. Sleep, as governed by your circadian system, is another non-negotiable factor in behavioral consistency. During sleep, particularly deep sleep and REM sleep, your brain consolidates the neural changes that occurred during the day. If you're trying to build a new habit or learn a new skill, but your sleep is disrupted or inconsistent, your brain cannot properly store those changes. This makes it harder to form lasting behaviors. So while many people focus only on what they do while awake, consistent behavior is deeply rooted in consistent sleep. In essence, consistency is not just about mindset or will. It is also about biology. By aligning your habits with your circadian rhythm, you reduce resistance, improve focus, and increase the likelihood that your behaviors will stick. Instead of forcing change against your body's natural systems, you flow with them. You harness the full power of your internal clock to support the person you are becoming. And when you combine this understanding with disciplined effort and purposeful repetition, consistency becomes not just a decision, but a natural rhythm of your life. Stress and discomfort are often seen as enemies to be avoided, but from a neuroscience and behavioral standpoint, they are essential elements of growth and transformation. The human nervous system is designed not only to endure stress, but to adapt to it. This process, known as hormesis, refers to the biological principle where exposure to short, controlled doses of stress leads to increased resilience and capacity. When you intentionally place yourself in states of manageable discomfort, whether it's physical, emotional, or cognitive, you are not breaking yourself down. You are training your system to respond with strength, adaptability, and focus. This principle is central to developing consistency because it allows you to act even when conditions are far from ideal. One of the most critical brain structures involved in this process is the prefrontal cortex. This region is responsible for planning, decision-making, and regulating emotions. It communicates directly with the limbic system, which governs your stress response, particularly structures like the amygdala. When you repeatedly expose yourself to controlled discomfort, such as doing a hard workout, making a difficult phone call, or focusing through mental fatigue, you strengthen the communication between these systems. The prefrontal cortex learns to regulate the stress response more effectively, meaning you become less reactive and more proactive. This neurological shift increases your capacity to take consistent action in challenging circumstances. Another important player is the autonomic nervous system, which governs your body's fight, flight, and rest responses. This system is divided into the sympathetic activating and parasympathetic calming branches. In moments of discomfort, your sympathetic nervous system activates. Your heart rate rises, your breathing speeds up, and you feel the pressure of the moment. But with training, you can learn to maintain cognitive clarity and intention even in this heightened state. Breathwork, cold exposure, and focused physical training are powerful tools that build this skill. They teach your body to be in a state of alertness without panic, and over time, this increases your psychological resilience. This ability to remain functional under stress is what allows consistency to take root. Too many people are waiting for life to feel easy before they commit to habits, but conditions will rarely be perfect. There will always be pressure, fatigue, distraction, and emotional resistance. If you train yourself to act despite these conditions, you build what is known as stress tolerance. This doesn't mean stress goes away. It means stress no longer controls you. And that is a foundation for high-level performance and daily reliability. Moreover, your perception of stress matters just as much as the stressor itself. Studies show that people who believe stress is harmful experience more negative effects than those who view stress as a challenge to overcome. This is because the brain interprets meaning. If you perceive discomfort as a signal to stop, your nervous system reinforces avoidance. But if you perceive discomfort as a signal to engage, your brain builds pathways that support perseverance. Every time you push through resistance with purpose, you send a message to your nervous system that challenge equals opportunity. That's how you transform discomfort from an obstacle into a training ground. The ability to act in discomfort also improves cognitive performance. Stress in moderate doses sharpens attention and focus. This is due to the release of norepinephrine and dopamine, neurochemicals that increase alertness and motivation. But this state must be managed carefully. If stress becomes overwhelming or chronic, these systems can become dysregulated. This is why recovery and self-regulation techniques like quality sleep, proper nutrition, and downshifting the nervous system with deep breathing or meditation are equally important. They allow you to recover between efforts so you can continue to show up consistently. Consistency, therefore, isn't built by avoiding stress. It's built by choosing to engage with it in intentional, structured ways. When you deliberately place yourself in controlled stress environments, you build capacity. You learn that effort is a signal of growth, not failure. You become more familiar with the sensations of discomfort, and they begin to lose their power over you. This is how elite performers across disciplines train. They don't just master the task, they master the experience of pressure and repetition under less than ideal conditions. That's what allows them to execute reliably again and again. It's also important to note that building stress resilience translates into all domains of life. If you can handle the discomfort of a difficult conversation, you'll be better prepared to handle the discomfort of a heavy workout, and vice versa. The nervous system generalizes these adaptations. This means that every time you engage with difficulty, instead of avoiding it, you're not just improving that one situation, you're upgrading your entire behavioral system to handle more. Ultimately, your ability to act with consistency is not just about discipline or motivation, it's about capacity. And capacity is built by doing hard things on purpose. Every time you choose discomfort for a meaningful reason, you expand what you're capable of. You teach your brain and body that stress is not the enemy. It is the pathway to strength. This transforms how you relate to challenge. Instead of fearing discomfort, you begin to seek it out, knowing it is the very thing that makes consistency possible. Over time, you don't just become more consistent, you become unshakable. Your environment is one of the most powerful, yet often underestimated, drivers of consistent behavior. While motivation and willpower are often emphasized as keys to consistency, the reality is that both are highly variable. They fluctuate based on sleep, mood, stress, and countless internal factors. However, your environment, both physical and social, can be deliberately structured to support the behaviors you want to maintain. This is not just a psychological trick, it's a biological mechanism. The brain is constantly scanning the environment for cues that tell it what to do. When the environment is aligned with your intentions, it makes the desired behavior the path of least resistance. From a neurological standpoint, the brain relies heavily on context-based cues. The hippocampus, which is involved in memory formation and spatial navigation, interacts with the prefrontal cortex to create associations between places, objects, and behaviors. This means that your workspace, your digital layout, the placement of tools, the people you interact with, all send implicit messages to your brain about what to prioritize. If your environment is cluttered, distracting, or associated with relaxation or entertainment, your brain will find it harder to engage in focused or disciplined behavior. On the other hand, if your environment is clean, purposeful, and associated with effortful work, it becomes easier to act in alignment with your goals without having to constantly summon willpower. One simple but powerful strategy is to design friction into your environment, friction for behaviors you want to avoid, and smoothness for behaviors you want to reinforce. For example, if you're trying to be more consistent with reading, placing a book in plain sight on your desk increases the probability that you'll read it. Conversely, if you're trying to reduce distractions, placing your phone in another room or using sight blockers on your devices adds just enough friction to make avoidance easier. These small changes, though they seem insignificant, tap directly into the brain's decision-making architecture. The less effort it takes to start a behavior, the more likely it is to become automatic. This approach can also be applied to time-based structures. Setting up a fixed time and space for certain activities, such as working, training, or studying, turns them into rituals. The consistency of the context triggers neural circuits that prepare the brain for that specific task. This is why people who always write in the same spot or exercise at the same hour find it easier to maintain their habits. The environment itself becomes a behavioral cue, reducing decision fatigue and reinforcing identity. Over time, it feels more natural to act than to not act because the external world is set up to guide your behavior. Your social environment plays an equally critical role. Human beings are neurologically wired for connection. The behaviors of those around you, whether in person or virtually, shape your own actions through mechanisms like social mirroring and peer reinforcement. When you consistently surround yourself with people who embody the traits you want to develop, discipline, integrity, effort, you begin to adopt those behaviors almost automatically. This isn't imitation in the superficial sense. It's a deep neurological adaptation driven by mirror neurons and social conditioning. You begin to normalize the behaviors you once considered difficult simply because they are modeled repeatedly in your environment. This is why accountability partners, group training, or even online communities can have such a profound impact on consistency. When your identity becomes intertwined with a group that values daily effort, it becomes harder to disengage. There's a biological cost to breaking social norms. Your brain wants to remain part of the tribe, and if the tribe values consistency, you will find yourself pulled in that direction, even on hard days. This is not weakness, it is adaptive behavior. The key is to deliberately choose environments and social structures that pull you toward the person you're becoming. Another element of environmental influence is noise and stimulation. The modern environment is overloaded with sensory input. Notifications, advertisements, digital distractions that constantly hijack your attention. The brain evolved in environments of low stimulation, where focus was directed by immediate needs, not by external manipulations. To be consistent today, you must actively shield your cognitive bandwidth. This means designing environments that protect attention, using noise, canceling tools, reducing visual clutter, limiting screen exposure, and organizing digital and physical workspaces for focus. These adjustments preserve mental energy and increase the probability that you will follow through on your goals. Lighting, temperature, and even scents can also influence behavior through their effects on the nervous system. Natural light exposure in the morning aligns circadian rhythms and increases alertness. Cooler temperatures can increase energy and focus. Familiar scents associated with certain activities can serve as subconscious cues that trigger readiness to perform. These are not gimmicks. They are sensory-based tools that communicate with your brain about what it should prepare to do. By curating your sensory environment, you reduce friction and enhance behavioral alignment. Ultimately, consistency is not just a matter of personal strength. It is a reflection of how well your environment is designed to support your desired behaviors. When you align your surroundings with your goals, you reduce the number of decisions you need to make and eliminate many of the battles against distraction, laziness, or fatigue. You shift the burden from internal force to external support. The most disciplined people in the world are not always the strongest in will. They are often the most strategic in structure. They use their environment as an ally, not an obstacle. If you want to become consistent, don't just try harder, design smarter. Let your surroundings speak the language of your goals. Let them whisper to your nervous system every day. That action is the default